Okay, so we've just gone through 4:30, so European cash close, do the usual quick review of the day and some of the things that we've seen. Starting off with obviously the big overriding story has been that of the fallout from the comments late yesterday evening from Donald Trump, a kind of fire and fury comment which has been well publicised in the press is certainly an escalation in terms of a previous US president using such kind of stark rhetoric towards an opponent. As I wrote in the strategy report midday, that type of language hasn't really been seen since the last time the US dropped a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima back in 1945. So hence the reason why this is seen as a slight escalation, and you had the negative repercussions materialise overnight in the Asia-Pac session, and obviously it dented some of the sentiment through the day. So European equities finished down. If looking at the DAX future in the centre-left chart, down about 150 points. Off its lows, it technically found some pretty decent support at S2 on the daily levels. But gold managing to maintain the flight to quality bid that it saw when his comments first hit yesterday evening. If I just circle when that was when Trump spoke last night. This was when Asia came in. This is when Europe came into the market. And then this was just around that pop with the break of the intraday highs coming just around the open of the pit session. That consequently, just seeing the pickup in volume, we broke then at around that time of the open 1277, and then we sprung higher through the R2 on the day, and some stops just run on the break of that August 1st high momentarily before then coming back to around where we settled now and finding a bit of resistance here more recently. But overall on the session, $17 gain. If we're going from a percentage move to kind of encapsulate the entire Trump comment, then you're looking at percentage-wise about 1.5% appreciation in gold. Now, where do we go from here obviously is going to be interesting. And looking at some of the commentary that's come out of the other senior ranking officials in the administration, one obviously who's very important is the Secretary of State Tillerson, who's actually on a tour, I believe, in Southeast Asia at the moment. And what his comments are is that he's downplayed the North Korean threat, saying that US allies, Japan and South Korea brush off the warnings. Americans should sleep well tonight, according to the Secretary of State. Obviously, we heard and talked about this morning Senator John McCain, who's the head of the Armed Services Unit on the Republicans. And so he also said that this is being over kind of dramatized by the president, and this is typically president being misunderstood. And as such, he pretty much threw it back in Trump's face to some respect. So how far this will go is really yet to be seen. But the fact that the equity markets here have largely stabilized and albeit are off the lows, we failed to really push lower in these US indices. Given the fact that the futures market had already declined throughout the Asia-Pac session, I just feel a lot of this has been priced in, and really there's not much else Trump can do to escalate this other than physical, actual military maneuver. Whether that would mean engagement, probably not, but obviously he could up military drills, for instance, in the Korean Peninsula, but this obviously runs a very high risk of retaliation or a preemptive strike coming from North Korea, which is unlikely for him to bring it to that point. One of the key players in all of this obviously is China, and China did comment earlier in the session. They said specifically that everyone should just basically calm down for a moment. We should stop using such aggressive language and any aggressive actions, and we should all be diplomatic about the situation. So ultimately, one of the key power players in how this will unfold in the long term is still maintaining relative calm. But I think the kind of backlash that Trump has had by saying such emotive type commentary yesterday seems to just been pulled back a little bit by the reality of the situation by his counterparts or his colleagues and peers on Capitol Hill. Nonetheless, though, as a day, as I said, gold higher. If we look at T-notes here in the bottom right, obviously have remained supported throughout much of the session. It's been a continuation, really, of the move from last night. But not sure how much further this story has to run, given the fact that it seems now largely priced in to that respect, without anything else obviously occurring. North Korea obviously will be on the monitoring for any further commentary that comes out of that region. Looking at one of the other big things that's obviously occurred in the session, we had this WTI RBOB sink after the biggest gasoline build in 7 months. Production hits a new cycle high. So looking at the numbers here, this was the APIs we had last night, this was the DOEs, and so in comparison to how the market had positioned itself, this number stood out, which the gasoline was a build of 3.42 million, which was pretty much double that of what we had in the APIs yesterday evening. As such, in terms of a bias, was initially we see some pretty heavy weight to the downside in WTI crude futures here, just looking at the SEP contract. We saw some volatility, we moved lower, we broke pivot, had an extension down to around the $49 handle before we've just come back and steadied around $49.20, but albeit still about 25 cents or so lower than where we were pre the release. US output, that had been up last week 0.2%. Notably, that was now pretty much unchanged, if not very minor negative 0.07%. So something to just keep an eye on going ahead in future. But overall, crude pulling back slightly, but not any dramatic outright prevailing trend seen on the back of that. We are still within this kind of trend, or I'd say defined range that we've had really since the beginning of August, the low being around this kind of 48.50 levels, and then upside, obviously with the bearish factor, we didn't get close to retesting intraday highs that were printed earlier today or yesterday at 49.79. Data-wise, we have had some economic data out of the US today. What we have had is wholesale inventories. In terms of that figure, we had a print at 0.7% month on month. This was compared with a preliminary estimate of 0.6%. So pretty much in line with expectations, maybe just a touch higher. What this has led to is a couple of the major investment banks have revised up their US trackers. So for JP Morgan, they raised their US Q2 GDP growth estimate to 2.6 from 2.4%. For Goldman Sachs, looking further forward, their Q3 GDP tracker looks like that's also been revised 0.1 higher as well. Also just seeing here on FX, talking of Goldman Sachs, just out, Goldman saying that they are revising down their forecast for the US dollar. They're moving their 12-month euro forecast to 115 from 105 previous. I think that's pretty unsurprising given the broader trends that certainly have been in play of late, that being kind of pretty persistent if you take out the dollar strength that occurred on payrolls and in particular, and then also the move that we saw in very quiet illiquid conditions yesterday on the JOLTS figure, then overall the dollar trend has been one of weakening in the context of a strengthening euro. And so not much of a surprise to see them moving their 12-month target to 115 from 105 previous. Looking ahead for the calendar, let's have a quick look at what we've got on the agenda for tomorrow. And overnight session, obviously, we'll be monitoring the general sentiment, given the vibe last night was a negative one, particularly for Korean assets. Obviously, if we were to go into a bluffing of potential targets from a Korean side, although they've kind of pinpointed Guam as one, given the US presence there, obviously South Korea would be a highly contentious issue, being the neighbouring country. And so definitely be monitoring that again from when we come in this morning. But as I say, unless there's something new that develops, I think on the Korean side that would need to be an actual another test, and it depends on where it lands then and how far it probably travels, which would be key. Because the Koreans have been frequently doing this as well as talking aggressively. That's normal for them. What wasn't normal was the US president to be so vocal about it. Looking at the session though for tomorrow, UK construction data, industrial manufacturing output for June, that's all coming out as a cluster of data at 9:30 Thursday morning. You've also got the UK trade balance. Then going into the afternoon, we've got the weekly jobless claims as per usual from the States, followed by the PPI numbers. Remember, is the main kind of economic data point that we're looking out for from the States this week. That's Friday. That's when we get the all-important CPI report. That's going to be the big one. You have one Fed speaker, and a notable one, Fed's Dudley, voter leaning Dove, speaking on employment trends and wage inequality. That'll be at 3 p.m. So while we're still here in the marketplace. Okay, guys, going to leave it at that. That was the calendar as I was just talking through. As you can see, the highlights here in bold. Otherwise, hope you had a good day. Have a good evening, and I'll be back on the briefing duties as per usual tomorrow morning, delivered live via tradinglive.com. All right, take care. Have a good night.